Okay. So yes, as I was saying, I am an early career researcher. So I will be only just briefly introducing you to my PhD topic as well as the areas that I am working on. And more than a technical presentation, this is going to be more of a narrative one and a holistic approach towards conservation, governance, and management. So যিহেতু মই অসমীয়া মই মাজে মাজে অসমীয়াটো কম ইংলিছতো কম kindly বেয়া নাপাব but for the larger understanding I will be mostly speaking in English. So I will, without much ado, I will quickly share my screen and dive right into the presentation. And yeah, I have to say I'm quite honored to be here and to be able to talk to you regarding this research that I am undertaking. So yes. I hope my screen is visible to all.
Yes, yes, visible.
Yeah. So today we'll be talking about uh, exploration of biodiversity conservation governance and how human-wildlife conflict management is mitigated or rather managed in the landscape of Assam. Now, you can see two words that might not be very familiar to all of you. One is polycentricity, which is quite self-explanatory, poly and centric, meaning having multiple centers. And the other is frugal innovation, which we commonly call jugaad in the context of India. Now, to give you some study context and introduction, we all know here, whoever is present, we all know what biodiversity is, we all know what conservation is, but what does not get enough stress and importance is how it is governed. And when we say governance, it is not necessary that we only mean the institutionalized structure, meaning the state mechanism. Governance can be done right from the grassroots. We need not always say that a particular natural resource is governed by the state because the natural resource belongs to everyone. It is called a common property resource. So, any small management uh, of its in and outs and of its structure, of how we use it, how we use the resource, how we our relationship to the particular resource can be called governance. Any particular individual can be governing a resource, a particular community, right up to the national level and the international level can be governing this resource. But what is happening is recently in the academic scholarship of resource management, we have been typically conveying the same meaning as resource governance. Anything we say call management is governance in case of natural resources. And recently, there has been argument that there is a lot of decentralization of solutions. There have been a lot of local partnership as well as technologies which are basically suited for local needs and local constraints, which are critical in dealing with the management of these kind of resources. Why? Because since during the Industrial Revolution, the world has seen a complete shift from traditional belief systems, traditional knowledge systems, to a more homogeneous, global, and largely widely accepted higher technology usage.
Padmaja, can you go to the full screen?
Should I close it?
No, full screen.
Is it in the full screen now?
Tonu, is it full screen? Yes.
Okay, sorry. Yes, so as I was saying that since the very beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we have the Global South and its so-called communities and civilizations have been gradually colonized over time. Specific to Assam, we can say that it has been under imperial rule as far as we can remember, from as back as the 19th century, the 1800s. So 200 years of imperial rule has been here. And under the imperial rule, we have seen a lot of shift in how our outlook towards our natural resources, particularly the forest, have been. The imperial system of governance created the protected area networks, which we still follow today in our part of the world and largely in most parts. But if we go farther back, if we go even back then, the last 200 years, we can see, and which are still very prevalent in some communities of Northeast India, some geographical locations where tribal communities are still there, that we generally prefer a more traditional approach, a more traditional outlook, which we call animism, nature worship, totemism, etc., etc. So these kinds of governance systems were already in place since before the imperial system came about. But something happened, something changed historically, we all know, and then commercialization happened. Because of commercialization of forest and forest products, the imperial system got its proliferation, and at one point it so happened that there was too much degradation than we could keep up. So the idea of protected area networks was created, and as soon as protected area networks came into being, the human dimension and the nature dimension completely separated from each other. They got into exclusion. So we as humans became one entity, and nature, animals, and the forest became another entity. And this divide, as important as it was then, and it still is important, it although protected our natural resources, at the same time, it also created kind of a strain in the relationship that we as people, as communities had with the forest and our natural resources. So now the Western scholarship on forest governance and natural resource governance is talking about decentralization of power. That is, breaking down of power or devolution of power from the top to the bottom. But in India, we all know that there is a center, there is a state, and the state governance, state government holds entire power over the protected area networks. Now, in this presentation, I am going to talk about two particular protected area networks, that is the Kaziranga and Manas National Parks, which are extremely important biological assets, not just to Assam, but to the world, because they are located in the Indo-Burma biodiversity hotspot. They carry millions of species, which are extremely important to maintain the delicate ecological balance that we have been following since centuries. So, looking at the importance of how this devolution of power has been critical in conserving forests, especially in the African continent, the Western scholarship started paying importance to traditional knowledge systems, to the importance of bottom-up governance structures, to the importance of participatory governance. And there was a tendency earlier that formal institutions, that is the state, and informal institutions, that is the bottom-up governance structure that I'm talking about, were strictly somehow alternatives. But now we are coming together, the scholarship on governance is coming together to kind of bring these two as complementary structures to each other rather than exclusionist structures to each other. So let's see how this polycentric governance structure, the decentralized governance structure, have implications in policy making and how these prove to be efficient or how these prove to be motivations to policy making of multiple notions in biodiversity conservation. So I'll give you a brief overview of what exactly is meant by polycentric governance. It was a work of Eleanor and Vincent Ostrom. They were prominent economists from the state of the US, the United States of America. And Eleanor Ostrom even received a Nobel Prize in economics for her exceptional work in polycentric governance. But she said that the common scholarship, the natural resources, should always be governed polycentrically, meaning that instead of one overwhelming structure of governance, there should be multiple semi-autonomous decision-making centers. That is one characteristic of a polycentric structure. There should be overlapping centers. There should be competition and cooperative relationship between the overlapping centers. And also there should be a recourse to conflict resolution mechanism. Now see, for example, if we are governing, say the marine biodiversity of a coastal region. So let's say a coastal region is 15 kilometers long and it is governed by one singular authority. So there is one singular structure. Any particular unit of that structure break, the entire structure will break, and the entire 15 kilometers of that coastline will be affected. But if that 15-kilometer coastline is divided into 5 units of 3 kilometers each, then one structure fails, the entire coastline will not be affected. So that is what polycentric governance means. So it has been generally observed that in polycentric systems of governance, the efficiency tends to be better than in unitary systems. Now, here I try to make an argument that Kaziranga and Manas National Park, although coming under the protected area networks, are actually polycentric systems of governance. We know that it is a state mechanism that has the ultimate say, but for that state mechanism to work, and there are gaps in the state mechanism, for those gaps to be filled, there are actually multiple centers of decision making. We will see how. There are also certain advantages to polycentric governance, as I had just said, that there is recognition of diversity, because as I said, that 15 kilometers of coastal line might not be composed of the same kind of biodiversity as well as the same kind of human inhabitation. So that diversity can easily be adapted or adjusted by polycentric systems. Then also there are multiple goals, but the common aim is the same. Then there is also a desire to reduce error proneness. Just like I gave you the example that if one system fails, then the entire system is not affected in polycentric governance. And also, it recognizes the limitations on information processing capabilities. That is, if it comes under only one singular authority, sometimes the workload can be very overwhelming, whereas if we break it down into smaller units, the efficiency of the system to run together is generally thought to be more. Now we see that even in the IUCN, they released a few years ago the Natural Resource Governance Framework. We see here that the sustainability of nature, social and environmental outcomes, and social equity and human rights are so intricately related that they have given out 10 principles and criteria of how to govern these natural resources. The first one being inclusive decision making. Second one being recognition and respect for tenure rights, that is, tenure rights of the indigenous peoples and the local communities. Third being recognition, respect for diverse culture, knowledge, and institutions. That is, any kind of grassroots institution, community management systems that are in place, they have to be recognized and they have to be involved in decision making processes. Fourthly, devolution of power, which I was just talking about in polycentric system, there is a devolution of power. It is clearly seen that is the center distribute the power to the lower bodies of authority. Fifth, there is a strategic vision. There should be a proper direction and there should be learning outcome and a feedback mechanism, a continuous feedback mechanism to develop and adjust the guidelines with time. Sixth principle being coordination and coherence, which is again another characteristic of polycentric governance, that the different centers of decision making should be well coordinated and there should be coherence, as in there should be discussions, there should be exchange of information between and amongst all of them. Seventh, there should be a sustainable and equitable shared resource across generations as well, not just across all kinds of people that inhabit a particular area, but the equitability of generational, the one that is also a sustainable development goal, that there should be generational equity of natural resources. That is also has been recently declared as one of the major principles in the natural resource governance framework. There has to be accountability. Now, how this accountability, we cannot, as the governed people by a government, we have all the right to ask for accountability, but we often lack the resources and the idea for it. So what happens when there are multiple systems in place or polycentric systems in place is that they can take accountability of one another. Since they are involved in the decision-making processes, they can ask questions and they can also, they have a right to get the information or the answers for it. Ninth principle being there should be a fair and effective rule of law. These rules of law are seen by the overarching legal systems in place. In our case, we have the Constitution of India, which has rules of law under the acts like Wildlife Protection Acts, Biodiversity, and also the Convention of Biodiversity. There are international laws as well. So certain effective rules of law should be in place. And 10th, access to justice and conflict resolution. Again, for example, in biodiversity conservation, we have the CBD at the helm. That is the Convention on Biological Diversity. Then the CBD is adapted by the center, and the center creates all the subsidiary bodies like the BMCs, the Biodiversity Management Committees, and uh, things like that within the state to see to the conflict resolution, to see to it that justice is available whoever asks for it in a particular geographical area. Now, based on this particular governance framework, the IUCN also has released 3 basic conservation action classifications. It is our idea that conservation strictly means that we have to protect our forests, that we have to protect our resources, but we have to be real about it. With the increase of economic development, with the increase of population, we cannot necessarily exclude the human dimension altogether. We have to strike a balance. So, to reduce the pressure on the forest and on the natural resource systems, what we do is we recourse to some behavioral changes, we recourse to some enabling condition actions, as is mentioned here. We obviously have land water management and species management as direct conservation action, but we also have indirect conservation action. For example, we can have awareness raising by outreach and communication, by protest and civil disobedience movements, which we are seeing in Assam quite often, that it is happening right now with the Vedantas. All of us know it. It is all over the news. We also have law enforcement and prosecution. Again, as I said, in terms of the acts and laws, in terms of WPAs, there are guidelines how arrests can be done, how criminal prosecutions can be done to anyone harming our natural resources. Then we have other behavioral mechanisms like livelihood, economic, and moral incentives. So there we can see in the 2 protected area networks, that is in Manas and Kaziranga, are highly, highly sensitive, but then they are also laden with human populations in their fringes. Now, to reduce the threat and to reduce the pressures on the forest, the government as well as non-governmental institutions and bodies, they give out incentives, they give out alternative livelihood opportunities, they give out non-monetary incentives as well and direct incentives as well. We'll talk about that later. We also have enabling condition action. For example, as it is being seen that recently Manas has increased its areas by taking into under its aegis a few other wildlife sanctuaries as well as protected areas. Kaziranga also, we have seen, I will not go into the details, but we see a lot of boundary changes there. We see a lot of eviction, we see a lot of land being taken under protected area designation networks. So those things come under conservation designation and planning. We also have, again, legal and policy framework. We have research and monitoring. As I said, many non-governmental organizations in both these areas are doing research and monitoring both on the social and biological aspects to inform the conservation designation, that is the boundary change designation methods. There is also education and training. We have seen nowadays that in schools, in colleges, environmental studies have become a compulsory subject. So that comes under formal education. Under capacity development, we see government and non-government agencies conducting numerous workshops in villages of the fringe areas to capacitate the community to be well adjusted to the ongoing changes that are happening. And also, one very important thing is institutional development. Nothing can happen without finances. So there are a lot of international bodies, donor bodies, and also state bodies that funds such activities so as for the smooth management and development of a particular sector. Now we have just to give you an overview, these are the 2 study sites. Now, this is a compilation, just that, like I said, why have I, out of everywhere in the world, why have I chosen only Northeast India's Manas and Kaziranga National Park? As I said, it is in the Indo-Burma biodiversity hotspot. Also, in Assam, it has a very unique characteristic of duality or dual sets of rules, because the Karbi Anglong landscape of the Kaziranga landscape and the Borolan territorial area under the Manas landscape comes under the Schedule 5 and 6 areas, and they have an overlapping jurisdiction. There is the council jurisdiction over the forest. There is also the state jurisdiction over the forest. So that creates a very interesting governance system that is in place in these two particular areas. Moreover, both of these have been recognized as UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Both of these places see multitude of organizations in place. Organizations like Aranyak, WWF, other grassroots level NGOs. Then there are state mechanisms like WII, WTI, etc., etc. And because of these multiple conservation actions going on simultaneously, it creates a very complex and layered issue. Also, uh, there is a continuous comparison between the effectiveness of state and non-state governance structure in these two areas. So that gives us also an idea to kind of weigh and compare which structure works best. And also, Manas has a very unique success story because it was once upon a time removed from the UNESCO World Heritage Sites because of the insurgency issues. But the same insurgents, due to continuous efforts by the forest department in cooperation with the local communities, they continuously, because of the capacity building and awareness generation and creation, it came out of the heritage sites in danger list, and it was again re-awarded the UNESCO World Heritage Site status. So that is a unique success story which is nowhere to be found anywhere else in the world. So let us dive directly into both of the cases. So here we can see the map of Kaziranga Tiger Reserve. We all know, we have all been there, but you can see that it overlaps three districts on the southern bank: Nagaon, Karbi Anglong, and Golaghat district. Now, the Karbi Anglong, as I said, is a scheduled area, and the rest of the area comes under the state mechanism. In the map that I have received from the Forest Department, you can see that Karbi Anglong portion does not have any information of the villages whatsoever, but the state portion has. This is what I mean when I say it is polycentric in nature, because we cannot control the movement of the animals in the particular green patch that you see, which is the main protected area. From that, there is a boundary which seems linear, but when we travel there, we know very well that this boundary is not linear, it is zigzag. Now, a movement of the animal cannot be restricted. You cannot say to an elephant that, okay, now you are in Nagaon district, you cannot enter Karbi Anglong district, or you are in Golaghat, you cannot enter Nagaon district. They are free-ranging animals, they will move anywhere. But the human sides are static. The government is static. So how do these people coordinate uh, in maintaining or managing the entire landscape is a very interesting thing. So the guidelines that the state provides are very clear about how the state forest department has to govern any particular animal moving inside the forest that comes under the state department completely. But once they come outside the forest, the wildlife is under the control of the forest department. But other dimensions, the civil dimension, the human dimension comes under the civil administration. So we all know when we are in field that the forest department people comes if an elephant is roaming outside of the forest boundary, and also the civil administration comes, and then they have to manage even on paper or in doesn't matter that they are doing it on paper or doesn't matter that they are doing it out of their hearts, but they have to be present there to maintain this particular conflict, and they have a certain set protocol on how to manage it. But the problem comes when that animal moves to Karbi Anglong, then what do you do? In the guidelines of the state mechanism, there is no clear-cut protocol on what to do if it goes outside your jurisdiction and enters the council. So the forest department, they have a very frugal approach towards it. They have a very handy approach. It is very common. We all know it. We can just pick up the phone, call the council administration, and inform them that an animal has wandered into your territory. So please look after it, and then the animal will be handed over to them. But this very process of information is a gap. It is often seen that when relations are not very smooth, that there is this gap, and to fill up this gap, to approach this gap, comes in the other civil society organizations, the local communities, and the grassroots organizations. Uh, Now, the forest department will have human resources, but the human resources is limited. It is not enough to cover such a vast geographical area. So, without the cooperation and participation of community members in the form of village patrolling police, VDPs, in the form of eco development committees, EDCs, there is no way that the governance is as smooth as it seems to be. Because without that information, without that inherent knowledge of the local communities who have been living there since hundreds of years, since generations, there is no way that a posted officer would know from which area the animal went into which area. So this very intricate relationship, very intricate network that is prevalent in this can make or break the governance structure. If the people are cooperative, only then the conservation and the conflict management can be successful. If the people are not cooperative, then the entire structure can fall down. So it's a very, you see, polycentric system, and that is why now it is officially recognized even by the IUCN on an international level that there has to be recognition of the indigenous peoples and the local communities, and there has to be recognition and respect for the diversity of culture, knowledge, institution, and traditions that are prevalent. How much of it is in practice, we do not know, but on paper, it has been recognized during the last international conferences. Here is a few boundary details, not very important. I have just collected how many villages are there. So there are, as I said, 3 districts, 5 ranges. So these 5 ranges has to coordinate with each other. And these ranges consist of not only the State Forest Department's range officers and the DFOs and the field directors, but also of volunteers from civil society organizations. Although the EDCs and VDPs are mandated as guidelines from the NCTA, the Tiger Authority, Conservation Authority, but they are most likely than not composed of exclusively local people, because only they have the knowledge, both for protection of the animals from poachers and also for mitigation of human-animal interaction or conflict. The same is with Manas. Manas, the only difference in its boundary is that the entire longer boundary of Manas is more linear than that of Kaziranga. And Kaziranga, the highway cuts right through the middle. So there, the movement of animals is largely disturbed. But in Manas, although there is a lot of human-wildlife conflict, especially in the Udalguri region of a larger landscape, but within the protected area, the boundary is somewhat linear. And because of that linearity of the boundary, and also because most of the ranges fall under the BTAD, the council area, they have some sort of traditional recourse mechanisms to combat human-wildlife conflict. So to ask certain questions, we have to know who the stakeholders are, and in resource management, the stakeholders and actors are always synonymous to each other. So stakeholder involvement is completely necessary in biodiversity conservation, as I mentioned, because there is complexity and knowledge has to be managed, because there has to be self-regulation, and also to maintain relationship with public authorities, and also to legitimize the social responsiveness. We all know it is a known fact that park authority and public do not always have a very good relationship. So to liaison or to facilitate communications between the two, there has to be non-governmental societies involved. Also, to look into commercial and strategic objectives like preservation of resources and commercial purposes, etc., there has to be involvement of multiplicity of stakeholders. Now, in resolving biodiversity issues in both these two areas, we have seen that there are civil societies involved, there are public authorities, obviously, experts and scientists. We all know there is an advisory state biodiversity management board, and also local communities. They do participate to a certain extent in the decision-making processes. And the main initiatives that involve stakeholders were listed out. For example, obviously, practices for biodiversity, there has been socio-political actions as well. That is another motivation of how the governance is done. And also for research and conservation methods, these certain stakeholders are involved. So certain stakeholder meaning there are 11 agencies. 11 agencies are this which I have listed, including the State Forest Department. These are the particular NGOs that are actively involved in these two areas, working towards conservation. The first two, Kaziranga Wildlife Society and the Corbett Foundation, are only found in Kaziranga National Park area, and the rest of them are found in both areas. Now, I have listed State Forest Department as an agency as well, because their power might be more on paper, but in practice, the gaps that are filled by the other NGOs and civil society organizations are extremely important in the decision-making process of this particular area. For example, in boundary designation, without the research from NGOs like WWF, Aranyak, WTI, the area designation could not have been done. And also, the civil societies could not have entered these areas without the help of the State Forest Department. So it is a kind of a symbiotic relationship between government and non-government agencies. Now you will see that EDCs, namely the Eco Development Committees, BDPs, are only found in areas where there is the National Tiger Conservation Authority. So EDCs are mandated for capacity building, for livelihood generation of the people, and these are created because there has to be a certain body, structural body, which will liaison between the forest department and the local communities. EDCs have one member from the forest department, one member or leader of the local community, and that is how they manage and maintain the structure of governance. We have the village patrol police as well for patrol and monitoring. We have self-help groups. A lot of self-help groups are there, which is anyway a civil initiative of the civil government. Now we have categorized the stakeholders into 4 parts. Obviously, high influence, high interest stakeholders are there. For example, the State Forest Department, which we have to interact closely. Then we have the low interest but high influence departments like the national government agencies, state government agencies, and funding organization. They generally look into monitoring and sanctioning. We have the high interest but low influence organizations like the civil society organizations, academics and experts, the local communities, etc., which are involved in interacting and information exchange. Then we have the low interest and low influence stakeholders, which are the EDCs, VDPs, SHGs, and other social enterprises. These are generally democratically formed, and these are a very typical example of devolution of power, which I was talking about. And these are the ones that maintain accountability. This is the institutionalized governance structure of the national parks. We all know how it works. There is the field director, then the DFO, and the range officers. And under the range officers, we have beat officers. Under the beat officers, we have forest guards. But the actual governance structure is an onion layer diagram, not a simple flowchart. Because at the lowest level, we have the State Forest Department working in conjunction with community organization. At the village level, we have the State Forest Department, we have grassroots social enterprises, the EDCs, SHGs, etc., and other public authorities, the civil authorities that come into play. For example, the panchayat and the rural development department, the agriculture department, the tourism sector, etc., etc. At the local or block level, we again have the State Forest Department, academics and experts, CSOs and NGOs. At the regional level, we have the State Forest Department, we have social enterprises. Then at the subnational level also, we have the national NGOs, we have the other central ministries, we have the National Institute, academics and experts working for the governance of this particular area. And obviously, at the international national level, we have the National Forest Ministry, we have funding organizations, we have international NGOs and international civil societies, and other civil central ministries. So the actual governance structure is more polycentric and more onion layered and not simply hierarchical. Now we have established that the governance is in fact polycentric in nature. Now let us see what frugality is as a concept. Frugality actually was brought up in the context of innovation literature. It means that we are very careful in our uses of resources. It means that there is inclusivity and participation while making a decision. It means that it is flexible and there is possibility of restructuring when solving a particular problem. And it is mostly associated with innovation in India. As I said, jugaad is the term that is used in India, not necessarily a term which means cheap, but rather it means affordable. It means inclusion because it emerges out from the growing economies. It is always the people in the bottom of the pyramid which contributes towards innovations which are more sustainable than the larger and homogenized innovations. Let us see how. In the global south, these are certain examples that I have listed out that the informal economies, one very interesting note is that the informal economic activities actually account for 50% of the GDP and more than 70% of employment, especially in the global south. And how these processes actually sustain themselves are often overlooked because we know that the informal sector is a repository of traditional knowledge as quick fixes, as quick solutions, but the long-term problems, how much effective it is in solving the long-term problems are not well researched. So in the context of this maintaining conservation governance, let us see if frugal innovation plays a larger role. Now, this is a photo which I took in Kaziranga National Park. She is a very recognizable face, Gogoi Baido. So, আপোনালোকে তাতে গৈ দেখিছে চাগে যে she actually runs a social enterprise manufacturing traditional items with recycled materials. So, indirectly, কি হৈছে? She has employed a lot of people from her local community. She has capacity built them. কিন্তু লগতে এইটো নহয় যে তেওঁ নতুনকৈ কিবা শিকাবলগীয়া হৈছে. Women in villages, we are already very comfortable with, the loom, the handloom, and it is a traditional knowledge that every household has. She only capitalized on that form of traditional knowledge and her innovative thinking that let me change this into a social enterprise. In turn, encouraged so many women to join her team that many households were employed. So they had alternative livelihood. And as a result, the pressures on the forest and the extraction of forest products actually lessened over time. So this is one recorded example out of many, many examples in the Kaziranga landscape. We also have the Kaziranga Orchid Park. Without going into the details of who established it, let us see how it is run. So they maintain a greenhouse with frugal techniques. Maintaining orchids in a greenhouse is a very expensive affair. But with the little resources they have maintained it very efficiently. For example, they have seen the need of each orchid. They have created education and awareness amongst themselves and maintained a herbarium, maintained an orchidarium, maintained indigenous paddy variety. What happens is that the culture is also preserved because of the usage of their traditional knowledge systems here. And improvisations on the traditional knowledge system. For example, okay, we know that this is a local variety growing here. Let's see how we can include scientific knowledge and make an affordable way to preserve it, led to the development of this particular orchidarium. Of course, there is involvement of scientific expertise. There is involvement of funding from NGOs. There is involvement of support from the state departments in establishing this. But This is another example of how it has created alternative livelihood, also preserved local knowledge and traditional knowledge, and provided a relief indirectly to the communities which rather depended on forest products and producers. So this is one example of what I call frugal innovation. Now, this is a bit technical. I'm going to skip through it. Yes, these are maps from Manas National Park. So you can see in the top map that from the duration of 2003 to 2021, when the exclusionist policy was strictly followed and when community involvement was not active, the number and the intensity of forest offenses meaning extraction of resources mainly, killing of wild animals or protected species, it was extremely, extremely high. And on the lower map, you can see within just 1 year, not even 1 year, some months, it has lessened drastically. Why? Because of the participatory approach of governance, because of polycentric approach of governance, and because of frugal systems like this, creation of these kinds of enterprises. Same is the thing with human-wildlife conflict. As I had already mentioned, that in Kaziranga, say for example, it is a huge landscape. When one animal moves to the other, how do they contact? The local police department works in cooperation with the forest department. The forest department works in cooperation with the local communities to extract information. The local communities then contact with the indigenous Karbi people because they know the traditional movement routes of elephants. And the local Karbi people again report back to the council authorities, and that is how this conflict is managed. Now, these rules are only commonly followed, they are not written anywhere. So, this is another kind of frugality which we see that is maintained here to maintain, which is beyond the scope of the state regulatory institutions and the formal bureaucratic structures. All the people involved, they adapt and improvise. They kind of follow a jugaad governance system to solve this particular conflict issue. They have also come up with genius technologies. We all know about the solar fences. So, as I had mentioned, solar fences is a very old concept in the Assam Hathi project, which was carried out way back in 2007-8 by Zimmerman et al. They also found that it is easy to expand and replicate into other areas. It is sustainable, cheap, and can be adopted by other communities without external NGO input once it is established. They provide ample opportunities for awareness raising. And the most important part is since the solar fences are maintained and managed now by the communities. Earlier, it used to be the forest department that was managing and maintaining them, but now in most areas, it is initially established by a civil society organization with cooperation from the forest department, but the maintenance and ownership lies with the local communities. Now, that sense of ownership, what happens, creates a kind of uh, community motivation to manage those solar fences, which earlier used to be in very dilapidated states because of non-maintenance. Then also it provides a huge corridor of tolerance, because during doing my field research, it was very evident when I was talking to people that now the negative attitude, most of the large negative attitude which was seen some years ago, now people are getting educated and aware about it. So they say that no, we are coexisting, we are interacting with animals, we are not in conflict with them. Obviously, this is not to deny that there is no human animal conflict, there is still a lot of it. But for the major part, it is still better than maybe some years ago. That has created kind of a corridor of tolerance for for people understanding that the traditional roots of elephants need to allow coexistence. In this picture, what I tried to show is in Manas earlier, it used to be linear solar fences. We can see for solar fences to work, there cannot be this long, tall grasses. When these grasses touch the wires, it stops working. So what the civil society organization did in discussion with the local communities, they knew that this was the problem, that is why it was not working. So the ownership from the state government came to the local communities. The NGOs gave them capacity building and asked them, discussed with them what can be done. And the local communities knew that this is the area from where the elephants pass. So what they did was they improvised on it. Rather than creating static fences, they created horizontal and hanging fences in some areas of Manas, in Panbari areas of Manas, because they have a huge issue of this conflict going on. So what they did was they, instead of just linear fences, with time they changed it into hanging fences. What I'm trying to say with this is we need flexibility, we need improvisation and jugaad on already available technologies. And after these hanging fences were established, there was some improvement in terms of mitigation of the elephant depredation. In some communities, Boro people, they also give up a certain produce of their agriculture to the elephants. That is all. That is prevalent both in Kaziranga and Manas landscapes. So what that does is that also provides, a certain recourse to that management. The elephants come, they eat the paddy, and they go back into the forest. They do not create disturbances per se. So these are certain traditional mechanisms. In certain areas, we can see the WWF India, they improvised the kettle shed. They made it more sturdy to prevent, the wild animal, that is carnivore attacks, for example, tiger attacks. তেওঁলোকে অলৰেডি যোনটো আমি ট্ৰেডিশ্যনেলি মানে এনেকুৱা গোৱাল ঘৰ থাকে সেইটো তেওঁলোকে বেছি ষ্ট্ৰং বনাই দিছে by providing raw materials, but then labor is done by the local communities itself, so that a sense of ownership to থাকে. So এইটো এটা frugal innovation বুলি ক'ব পাৰি, because গোটেই বস্তুটো uproot কৰি দিয়া নাই, traditionally যোনটো already চলি আহিছে সেই traditionটো maintain কৰিছে, but only a little bit better, a little bit improvised, so that the people still can feel a sense of familiarity to the place. Tongi ghor bonwa hoise. Here also the raw materials, the expertise is provided by external organizations, but the labor, the building blocks are the local communities. The Corbett Foundation has undertaken a lot of such initiative in the Kaziranga landscape. They have also come up with this amazing idea of the improvised chain link kettle shed. Also, this is not an outside technology. It was developed in conjunction with the local communities. So what I'm trying to conclude is that in human wildlife management, in the Kaziranga landscape, I had conducted 37 interviews, and almost all of them, 35 out of them, they agree that improvising upon community knowledge using frugal technology is good enough, if not a permanent solution. There can be no permanent solution as long as people are evicted in large masses, but it is a good enough solution, as opposed to completely foreign and hi-fi technologies which they cannot afford and implement in the grassroots. Obviously, such technologies are also prevalent, but those are undertaken by the WTI and other organizations of the state forest. There are alternative livelihood enterprises, 56 out of 63. They build upon and use traditional knowledge skills, and they only prefer frugal methods. Evidently, there are interactions of such frugal innovation and polycentric governance in these two fields at least. So jugaad is a quintessential characteristic of governance, of biodiversity conservation governance, and they are generally seen either in processes or in technological intervention. So what we today call in the Western literature as citizen science is nothing but the usage of local tacit knowledge, which was already there within the communities, and we have been, as researchers, academicians, and experts, been extracting those knowledge, sometimes completely, stigmatizing it as not scientific enough, but they are indeed scientific. For purposes of sustainability, we have to take it slow, one step at a time, and such kind of prevalent, local, tacit, indigenous, traditional knowledge systems prove paramount in the evolution of power systems. So the larger question that remains is this kind of polycentric governance, where we kind of give a certain amount of decision-making authority to all the centers of governance that are present in the particular area, does it prove to be more sustainable or more effective in biodiversity conservation? And does frugal innovation usage in such systems prove to be more effective rather than usage of very high tech or very expensive technologies, which can be rarely afforded by the people in the local communities? So I'm going to close my presentation with these two questions. Maybe when we research further, we can get more concrete evidence. But up until now, it seems like it's working temporarily at least. So thank you. Any feedback will be well received by me. I would love to hear your suggestions, and there are already experts in the field that I can see are present here in the panel discussion. So over to you, Satyendra.
Okay, thank you very much. Really, you are hammering on two important aspects of this biodiversity conservation. And in fact, you have rightly said, because in Manas, the same insurgent guys who were, almost it is compelled to, lost the World Heritage Site, and the same guy, when they have come to the mainstream circle, they have take the things in from the different perspective, in a positive perspective, and make Manas sustainable. Because I have made a few years back in Tezpur University, I have made a few guys actually who were actually they were insurgent, they were extremists, and then they have surrendered, and then they made some kind of, how community engagement can help to, take the biodiversity conservation forward, and how the indigenous knowledge or local knowledge can, help us to build up these things on this program innovation, and as well as, this our polycentric, this decision making. If some kind of, I think, empowered all the people, all the institution, all the local bodies engaged in this in such kind of contribution. I think this can help. This can help us a lot. So this is my personal feeling. So right now, the session is, the forum is open to all. So any kind of points to raise, or any kind of question to be asked to Padmaja, please.
Yes, thank you, Satyendra.
Yeah, Otto, please. Otto, you can ask.
Second.
Yeah,
Hello.
can you
Yeah,
hear
Rahul.
me?
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, Otto, please.
Yeah. Padmaja, thank you very much for your very informative and very in-depth presentation.
Thank you.
Uh, so, a couple of questions actually. I mean, they are all from different slides.
Mm-hmm.
One was about, I think it was about the Gogoi Baido in
Mm-hmm.
Kaziranga, the social enterprise, and where you were talking about, the people were less dependent because of the social enterprise. The local people had become less dependent on the forest. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, they were less, they had to rely less on the forest produce and go more towards weaving and development of other products, basically. I mean,
Right.
they're using their traditional knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my feel, it's not, you cannot exactly call it a question, but it is more of a feel that,
Mm-hmm.
there are both positives and negatives to this. Like, people moving away from the forest, moving away from the forest produce. The negative side, I feel, is that once you move away, the attachment to the forest can also decrease. Like, when you go to the forest, you have a kind of a love for it, or the attachment to it. Like,
Right. Right.
you can start loving it because it gives you something, and you
Mm-hmm.
are nurturing it in your own way.
Right. I agree.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, other positive side of it is that if there is any intrusion in terms of poachers or unwanted elements,
Mm-hmm.
these are the people who kind of first notice it.
Yes.
because they move away from, I mean, they are the ones who visit regularly or in a periodic basis.
Right.
So they are likely to notice it. I am not saying that they will always notice it, but they're likely to notice it.
Yes, you're right.
Those are the positive parts, like,
Right.
so when you move them away from the forest, these two positives are likely to come down.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
and along with it, their traditional knowledge or the traditional instincts, like, their tradition born instincts, like, they're born forest people, so they can track an animal very easily.
Right.
They
Right.
will smell it like, miles away, whereas we'll not even see it when we are just sitting next to it.
Correct.
Just taking an often example.
Correct.
Those are the positive sides. The negative side can also be there in terms of, like, when they move away, like, they're unlikely to become prey to predators. I mean, man-eating predators, like,
Right.
or attacks, like, not necessarily man-eating, but attacks by the wild animals.
Right.
Like, for example, right now in UP, you have this wolf attacks, bherias in Barhet. So those kind of situations come down, those kind of conflicts come down. But that is the flip side is that what I talked about, the positives also go away
Right.
along with it.
Right.
So I think we somehow need to have a balance with that, a balance in that, like, rather than saying we should move away everybody to alternative livelihoods.
Yeah.
There has to be a balance somewhere, especially in situations like Kaziranga, Manas, and, like, wildlife sanctuaries or reserve forest,
Correct.
basically.
Correct.
So that is one part that I wanted to talk about. Like, do you think, I mean, this needs more exploration, or do you think, I know there is no right way to do it, or there is no right balance to strike, but there can be, some
Yeah.
degree of
Definitely.
encouragement that we can do to these people to stay connected with the forest,
Right.
basically.
Definitely. You have raised very interesting points, and I completely and totally agree with you. So this was the entire like concluding question from my side as well. That where do we find the balance? Where do we find the balance where we can say that okay, we have kind of going towards on the right path of sustainability. I'm not claiming at any point that moving entirely away towards alternative livelihood mechanism can be an extremely can have a long-lasting, extremely positive impact culturally. That is what I'm trying to say.
Correct.
But exactly like you said, that the negative, the points that you had mentioned as negatives, that okay, the dependency is reducing, so conflict situations are also reducing. But what I have noticed in certain parts of Kaziranga is that, in certain ranges, in certain fringe villages, I think it's more common knowledge that they are allowed to enter up to a certain point inside the forest for foraging of their domestic cattle or herding of their any kind of, domestic animals that they rear. I think that kind of controlled grazing mechanisms that are in place uh, proves to be quite healthy in maintaining that kind of relationship with the forest. And as you
True.
have so rightly pointed out, that the information, which I was also trying to stress in my presentation, that the community, the grassroots, are the most important link. They hinge on a very delicate balance, and if they fail, the relationship with the community fails, then the entire structure can fail. And we have seen a lot of examples of this. A lot of outbreaks of poaching incidents have happened mainly either due to unavailability of information from the locals, or unwillingness to share information, to put it in a more subtle way. So that is one very important aspect. So that is the problem, or rather, I would say, with demarcating area to be protected area network. So, if I may say, if I may be so bold to say that, to maintain this particular balance, or to strike this particular balance that we are talking about, we need very, very context specific exploration. We need very context specific exploration of both the biological side as well as the social side. We need to look into the economic side. We need to look into the sociological side. We need to look into the anthropological side of the societies or the communities residing on the fringes. And the entire discourse around coexistence exactly hinges on this. Exactly hinges on the fact that we try to curb movement. We have been always trying to curb movement since the imperial times, the protectoria network structure of both the people and the animals. But this curbing of movement is what created the separation in the first place. What created the problem in the first place, is my personal opinion. So yes, you're very right in it, and I'm totally in favor of what you said, and I do agree that there has to be extensive exploration on this. We have enough exploration on species diversity, biodiversity, and things like that, but we have very less exploration of the interaction of the two, because we tend to separate the two.
Okay. Padmaja, I think there is another one. Rahul, Dr. Rahul, please.
Yeah. Hunishane?
Yes. Hi.
Yeah. So, Padmaja, this was a very excellent kind of a presentation, and your research, I believe, it's going to give us a lot of new insights into a lot of problems. But just wanted to know, have you explored the role of technologies like GIS mapping, drone surveillance,
Yes.
early warning systems? What role this can play in real innovation?
Okay, so the role of these technologies is extremely important. As I had mentioned,
I mean, like for human wildlife conflict management,
yes,
particularly.
These technologies are exceptionally important. As I had already mentioned, I have not shown in the presentation, but I did mention that organizations that are kind of subsidiaries
There's a lot of disturbance. I cannot hear you actually.
Yeah.
I think, don't know. Yeah. Sanjeev Goswami, can you mute it, please? Sanjeev Goswami, can you mute it? Or better mute ko diyo paini kyo?
Yes, I
thank
think.
you. Okay,
Yeah. So basically, I was asking about this: what role technologies like GIS mapping, drone surveillance, and early warning systems they can play in frugal innovation, particularly for wildlife. I mean, human conflict management.
Right. So CWRC has been using such technologies, and also nowadays many NGOs are using these technologies for creation of early warning systems, so to say. Now, early warning systems also has lot of you can say categorizations. So there is this chip thing which are implanted in the elephants, non-intrusive, and does not harm the animal at all. So the CWRC have been doing those satellite monitoring of movement of elephants, but those technologies are extremely expensive.
No. I mean, how can you integrate it into some frugal innovation?
Okay, so the frugal part of this is that in creation of early warning system, the certain apps have been developed which are accessible by local people as well.
Okay.
So, for example, the villages have certain groups, and each group has, is connected via these apps, or sometimes via WhatsApp also. So, এখন গাঁৱৰ পৰা যদি আনখন গাঁৱলৈ movement খিনি গৈ থাকে, তেতিয়া মানে already information to pass কৰি গৈ থাকে মানুহখিনি। গতিকে সেইটো এটা frugal aspect হয় এই গোটেই technology। So that is what I have observed.
Second, I have another question. So how does this polycentricity help in balancing the economic needs of communities, with biodiversity conservation, and particularly, in the areas that is very prone to human-elephant conflict?
Yes, okay. This is a very tough question, actually.
Yeah. I just wanted to know. Maybe you can find out later.
Yeah. I am in the process of finding a definitive answer. But এতিয়ালৈকে যিখিনি observation হৈছে, এইটো হৈছে যে যদি polycentric governance নহলহেঁতেন, তেতিয়া অকল forest departmentৰ authority থাকিলেহেঁতেন, বা অকল government departmentsৰ authority থাকিলেহেঁতেন. And sometimes conflict areaবোৰত মানে people state relationship to খুব এটা smooth বা positive নহয়। গতিকে সেই kind of negativity to navigate কৰিবলৈ বা liaison কৰিবলৈ civil society organizations a বহুত important role এটা play কৰে. Civil society organizations does not necessarily mean only NGOs. It can mean any kind of community organization, grassroots organization. So যদি liaison smooth হয় তেতিয়া অকমান tolerance to বাঢ়ে as in kind of. But economic development se help kore etu etyalike observations e poa hoise comment koribo নোৱাৰিম. So maybe at a later stage I'll be able to answer your question.
So I mean, like, have you tried to identify these challenges in coordinating various stakeholders? I mean, local communities, government, NGOs, under a polycentric governance model?
Yes, I have. It's not necessarily always smooth. That a conflict to hoy ketiaba.
Right.
There is a lot of competition also, but competition or long-term effect to, in my opinion, positive hoy. But jiman besi competition thake, jiman besi involvement hoy. Or jiman besi better koribo bisare. Ankon gaon ami besi better korsun. So it is a positive reinforcement hisabe ahe. But relationship do necessarily hoy positive hoy. Ketiaba negative dekha hoise.
Okay. But there are challenges.
Yeah, there are challenges.
Padmaja and Rahul.
Thank you, Padmaja.
Thank you.
Yeah, Padmaja and Rahul, I just quickly want to interject something over here. And this is in response to Rahul's question about how polycentricity can help in the economic aspects or uplift the economic status of the communities involved because of polycentricity. Now, my observation is that unlike what Padmaja said, like, not completely unlike what Padmaja said, the forest department sometimes, being the state and being the ultimate authority, sometimes plays a kind of a spoil sport or a negative role. Negative role is a kind of a very strong word here, but for the lack of something better, I'm forced to use this word. What I mean, if I can elaborate, is like, they have these policies that you cannot plant trees in a reserve forest.
Correct.
You can plant a tree in your own private land by the roadside if you have permission from the highway authorities, but not in a reserve forest. Now, it is not always necessary to plant trees to uplift the economic benefits of uplift the economic status of the people. Now, this is because, like, forest department looks at forest with only two views. Like, their views are cut into two parts only. Now, they look at it from a bipolar view, if I may say so. Bipolar is probably the right word. One is major forest produce, the other is minor forest produce. And their eyes are fixed on only major forest produce. Major forest produce is timber. And timber is very valuable. So you cannot have timber smuggling. So people are not allowed to go into forest, not allowed to cut firewood, because in the name of firewood, timber cutting happens. Like, tree cutting, timber trees are also cut down. But what they ignore, and even though the policies are in place, they ignore is the minor forest produce. Now, minor forest produce is what can uplift the economic status of the people involved in and around the forest and in the forest itself, the forest dwellers. There are a lot of people who are forest dwellers. Because move the forest dwellers away from the forest, a lot of political and social issues also arise, and I can talk for hours about that, which I will not do now. But what I'm trying to say is that if the forest department lays proper stress on exploitation of the minor forest produce, a lot of these problems will go away. And I'll give you just two examples. Two examples are about sericulture again. In the forest of Assam, we have hall trees, right? We have plenty of hall, which is again valuable from the timber perspective, which is again a major forest produce. Because it is a major forest produce, they do not allow rearing of tussar silk on hull. Now, tussar silkworm feeds on the leaves of the hull tree. Okay? So they don't allow that because it's a major forest produce. They have come up with various excuses and ultimately do not allow you to throw roadblocks and do whatever, like, red taping, but they do not finally allow you to grow rear silk, tussar silkworm on the hull trees. If that has been allowed, the local people would have uplifted themselves, and Assam's economy also would have been uplifted. Forget only the local people.
Mm-hmm.
Your social enterprises could have gone places if this was done properly. If the forest department had encouraged that,
Correct.
that would have happened. Now,
Mm.
the second example, this Amar Athia call, Him call, we are beginning to realize the value of those call, those particular banana trees now.
Mm.
What I'm trying to say is, those are also used as as border fencing,
Mm.
for as protection against any elephant
Elephants,
depredation.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
So those are the food for the elephant, and they feed there and go back. They do not go and ravage the human settlements in that case if they find the food and the
Correct.
outskirts of
Mm.
fringes itself. Now, that is again not very encouraged because, if you go and plant it in the forest, it can become invasive, it can become
Mm.
this, that, and they'll come up with a lot of excuses.
Mm.
Just because they don't want to take a stand or they don't want to go deeper into it, they do come up with this kind of nonsensical excuses. This is my experience as a third party. I've not been deeply involved in this, so I will say, I may not be 100% right, but this is my observation, not my experience. This is my
Mm.
observation.
Yeah, yeah.
Answer our question, this is how polycentricity could have uplifted the economic status of the people
Mm.
if this was allowed by the forest department, or if somebody goes and hammer and tongs and start working on it.
Mm.
Deep dive into it and starts pushing the forest department, because the policies are already in place.
Yeah.
With biennial policy, as per which you can go and raise this kind of silkworms in the forest, or not the silkworms, may not be the silkworms, but you are allowed to plant these kind of trees in the forest and collect the leaves by forming joint forest management committees and then raising silkworm at your home or wherever it is it should be
Mm.
raised.
Mm.
This biennial policy is already in place.
Yes, yes.
So what is the problem in implementing that?
Yeah.
It is just that they will come up with some excuses. They don't want to probably work harder and work more for the people, basically. That is my take on it.
Yes.
Now the other thing is Rudraksh. Rudraksh is very good example.
Mm-hmm.
Rudraksh is wild in Assam. It is common in Assam.
Yes.
So, and the forest department has a policy that you can go and collect Rudraksh seeds from the tree,
Mm-hmm.
and you can then sell it. You are supposed to, you are allowed to form a JFMC, you are allowed to form a FPO and sort them, add value, and then sell it in the market.
Yeah.
But if you go to Kamakha, where most of the Rudrakshas are sold, they'll tell you they have all come from Nepal.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, this is extremely funny. We have Rudraksh here in Assam, but then Rudraksh comes from Nepal.
Yeah.
Why is this not encouraged? Why is somebody not looking into it and saying, don't get the Rudrakshas from Nepal, sell the Rudrakshas from Assam here? We'll have less conflict. This polycentricity will be more developed. I mean, the frugal innovation will be better, and the economic status of the people will be uplifted. It is just that the policies which are in place are not being implemented for whatever reasons, it is laziness, or it is ignorance, or I don't know what else to say, So this is my observation. This polycentricity, how it can uplift the economic status, this is how it can uplift the status. But because of ignorance, maybe because of laziness, or because of sheer lackadaisical attitude, it has not been happening. And the consequences are there for us to see, basically, on this one.
Yes, your observation is actually correct. That is what I said, that there are the strain of the people-park relationship is on paper liaison by the other civil society organization, or should be liaison. But yes, in action, in effect, and on ground, there are a lot of invisible challenges, implementation challenges, especially. So this red tapeism, etc., although the policies are very polycentric in nature, now the new amendments are also polycentric in nature on paper, but in practice, there's still red tapeism. There is still a lot of bureaucratic hassle, so to say. So yes, I mean, that is a very concerning area.
The implementation is extremely poor.
Yeah, yeah. So,
And in like people like you and me, when I say you and me, I mean like, small NGOs or small social organizations cannot go and do this. Like,
yeah,
because the moment you start working on this, they'll come up with 10 number of roadblocks for you.
yeah, yeah,
So the intervention here has to be top down and also bottom up. It has to be an according approach, not just a top down approach or a bottom up approach. Like,
yes, yes, absolutely.
Rahul, your comments?
No. You have made a very good observations. Actually, you have you have good experience. I mean, very long experience with this. So obviously, I mean, you have been involved with this for a long time.
No, I mean, yeah, my observations mostly, like,
Yeah,
some
it's
of
a very
my experiences also.
about forest department. You are very correct.
Right, I tried doing this with the forest department,
Yeah,
and
you're very correct.
sharing my experience.
Yeah.
And regarding the drone and the GIS technologies, actually, that can be a great help, and to some great extent, GIS has been used, like, geographic information services. That, however, it's a pretty labor-intensive process, especially GIS. When I say labor, I mean high-end software in high-end labor, like software engineers and geographists who needs to interpret and then feed the information in the GIS system. It's more than feeding the information. It is the exploitation, like, how you can exploit the GIS application to better manage the forest and its boundaries. Like, that is exactly what you have asked, I think. And you can do that and supplement it with the drone, like, drone photography or drone surveillance. A lot more can be achieved in terms of.
I'm actually initiating a training program, 15-day training program in different colleges. Actually, there will be 22 programs throughout Northeast where we'll train them in colleges, 25 students each, about GIS and using drone. So this is a one field like where I believe the students might be interested in using.
It will be very
next month we are starting it.
Yeah, it will be very interesting. And this is
This
exactly
is getting funded by Department of Science and DST. So
Okay.
we'll already purchased some 1 crore rupees worth of some software, which have got a lot of licenses for these colleges. So these 25 students, they will have the skills to go about if they want to, after they learn it, to collect this data. So I'll try to inspire them to go into doing, I mean, as field work, go into wildlife and human conflict.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good initiative.
Right. So this was actually like, our CM has encouraged this, like, sometime back, about 1.5 years, 2 years back. He encouraged the use
He
of
tried
drone.
a program through Nectar, actually. That didn't work out.
Right.
This 1 year back. It was
1
tried.
year back, exactly. But I think we users of private parties would have been more effective. But then
Because for this, what you said, now we need some money. So this time we are supplying the software and the hardware. These people will get this software and the hardware free. All they need to do is learn it and implement and apply it.
Correct.
Okay. I think Rahul, so let's close this because time is constrained. We can talk offline. Thank you very much. This is a very nice discussion. It's a very good. I think Otonu has a vast experience, really his practical experience. So we keep discussing. So maybe on this part we can have a different offline talk, and we can keep going on that how these things can be take it forward. And thank you very much. Thank you all esteemed members. Thank you Padmaja for your very insightful and informative. This is a very nice kind of things because polycentricity and the frugal.
Next time, very good.
I just one last word. The word frugal means wise use of resources.
Yes.
Wise use of
That's it.
Parsimonious.
That is, we are very much expert in that. All Indians are very expert on this frugal. That is very nice also.
It's not using less, but it is wise use.
Yes,
wise. So thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for the till Climate Talk 16th. So have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It was wonderful.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Otonu. Thank you.
Thanks all.